So just a few words about me. I was born in Paris, France in 1994, so I'm 30 years old. And I studied art in fine art school. So you have this art section in French fine art school, which is kind of weird because it's like multidisciplinary school. So you're not really specialized in one medium. So you tend to study different stuff. And so it was both like a strength and a weakness, but I will talk about it a bit later. So to start with, a few words about my background. When I was a student, I used to do a lot of VJing stuff. So it was a way for me, I don't know if everybody's familiar with what VJing is, but it's basically the idea to project animation usually in clubs or in parties, along with a musician, and try to kind of synchronize the visuals to the music. It's a very basic description, but it was about 10 years ago. And actually, for me, it was the first opportunity to show my work to a real audience and not only my fellow students at school. So I started to, I was experimenting a bit with animation and motion graphics in general at that time. And in school, it didn't really speak to the, even to the teachers. I mean, I was always, they used to tell me all the time that it was not really something I should do. Maybe I should try something else. So I took this opportunity of VJing to start showing my work to a wider audience. So basically, I did it for a few years. It was some kind of student job at first, and then it became more regular work for me. So it was quite, easy at the time to get some gigs actually, because we are not a lot of VJs creating our own content. And in parallel of my studies, I started to ask myself a lot of questions about what it is to project your own visuals on a screen in front of an audience, trying to sync it with the music. So all these questions started to just kind of rumble in my head, and at some point, I decided that working in a nightclub was not what I wanted to do. So this is just a short introduction, so you will understand maybe a bit better from where I come from. So one thing I realized working in clubs is that everybody is always watching the DJ or a single point. So it's this is an old VJ demo. So it's a bit like that, actually. Everybody's focused on a single point. And I was not really happy with that, actually. I mean, I wasn't happy with two things, basically. Everybody is always watching the same point. And also, the visuals basically came second. People were here for the music. So I started to ask myself a lot of questions about what's the point of having one all this focus on one person, and also this relationship, this very frontal relationship you have to the work or to one person. So at some point I got a bit bored with that, and I tried to escape this club context. It made me realize the importance about maybe not working with a single object, but to consider more the context and try to expand the image out of the screen. So this is how it started for me. Just a few references, because talking about working with context rather than just a frame or picture, I think it's something that's been existing for a long time. Hence this example of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican. For me, it's really a good example of what an immersive piece could be, art piece could be. Of course, I don't know if it was made for this particular purpose. Of course, at the time they didn't call it an immersive artwork, but the effect it produces is exactly what interested me. Of course, when the priest is doing a speech, everybody's like focused on him. But when you enter basically any church, you have like things all around you. You have like paintings, sculptures, like architecture. The whole context is like totally like overwhelming, and the sensation you have when entering such a place is something that really interests me, and trying to catch this this power. I'm not talking about like religion here. I'm more talking about like the visual effect and how it, somehow how it conditions you to be like available for like art or something else if you want to use that art to deliver certain messages, for example. Another artist who inspired me a lot is Ellsworth Kelly, because you have this logic of like trying to get out of the canvas, trying to get out of the screen, and to break this very frontal relationship to the audience. So, of course, they. It's very different from the previous example, but like this logic of like breaking the mold, I would say if I were a sculptor, is something that started to really like interest me, strangely because of this like club context experience. Another quick example of an artist I really love, a French artist called Bertrand Lavier. Who, it's another level of trying to break the mold somehow. I don't know if you're familiar with this Walt Disney production series, but basically what he did is to kind of extract like sculptures and paintings in Mickey Mouse comics, like that were just drawn as for like an illustration purpose, like you can see in the picture, like bottom left here. And what he did is just actually taking this like very small details that is actually not very like meaningful. It's just like an illustration, and bring it into the real life. And actually, I really love this idea, this process, because it's both something not very like interesting in terms of like story, for example, but I think it's very meaningful also because it says something about like art at a current point in time, for example. So I think like comics are pretty amazing for that, because it's always it kind of testifies of like something happening when the comic is done. So this is another way to break the mold. So just starting with these few references. So and in the end, back to what I'm doing. I also maybe I also wanted to just like try to get over the DJ and maybe be able to just to be the one, or to be not the one, but my work to be the thing that people would look at. So nothing to do with girls, but yeah. Actually, during this like VJ period, I met also some other like fellow VJs who had pretty much the same questions, and we started a group called NTVJ. I worked with this group for like 5 years. I'm not part of it anymore, and we started to experiment with like what we knew actually, like technically, like how to use projectors and computers, and doing some pretty simple animation, because as I mentioned, I don't really have a background in animation. I learned like mostly by myself, and what interested me was to slightly, how could I say that, like shift the use of a device we had access to, like projector, and instead of like projecting onto like the screens, trying to use it as a light source, because of course light can go like pretty much anywhere, and try to project onto three-dimensional objects. And this is one of the first pieces we made back in 2008, called like Light Sculpture version 2. And so there's a small video. I don't know if you have sound here. Okay, yeah. It's the team was composed of like these guys here. So it's just like wooden cubes painted in white and projection, basically. So it's very simple. I mean, the animation is pretty basic, and of course, I mean, you guys know about like projection mapping. So like this kind of aesthetic and this kind of piece is now pretty like, I mean, you've seen a lot of stuff like that. But back in 2008, it was quite, I mean, I think it was quite new somehow. Okay, so I won't play the whole video, but you get an idea. So we started experimenting with this like 3D, not 3D projection, I don't like the term, but like projection onto three-dimensional objects. And for the video the installation I just showed you, like the public was also able to go around the sculpture, which was also, I mean, it's pretty like, it's a question that comes like on a pretty regular basis in like art history, I guess, because I'm pretty sure, I mean, it's just, all this is just a cycle, like we're pretty much asking ourselves the same questions, it's just different because we have like access to different technology, but like the core question are, I mean, I think pretty much pretty similar. So this is another project in 2009, here it was a stage design for a music festival in France. I don't know if you can really see it, but I mean, of course, we still have this very frontal relationship here, but we tried also to expand the like animation here also to the side of the room, because you can see like the white thing on the left wall and on the right wall actually. Were like kind of augmented paintings, so it was like basically painted in white, and all the details you see are just projection. Like this is another project, because yeah, actually pretty quick we had the opportunity to work on like bigger and bigger canvases. So we tried to experiment also with this idea of like blending content from the computer, like synthetic content with like a physical object. And I think this relationship is like pretty like rich. I mean, it has a lot of like potential. We really wanted to explore and trying to experiment with that. So, I mean, same for like the white blocks, but like the 3D things you can see here is something that, I mean, of course now is pretty, like, it's becoming like a classic, like all the blocks going out of the building. But yeah, working with like a trompe-l'œil or this kind of thing was also a way to like try new ways to play with perception somehow. Yeah, this, I mean, I won't tell the whole story behind the fun, but it was the city was being built when we did the piece, and like this building was one of the only one that was finished. Also, I mean, this picture, just to say a few words about the importance of the context I mentioned before. All the works I'm going to show you today are all ephemeral, actually. There is one that is permanent, but most of the works I do are just here for a few days. And it's a very particular relationship to the work, because it only exists for like a few hours, days. And I really agreed with what Alex said in the previous keynote about like when you're done with the piece, like the artist is dead. So it's even more true maybe with this piece, because the piece itself is gone after a few days. And so, yeah, the importance of the context is also a pretty important element I will talk about later. So this is another collaboration from 2010 with a musician called No Such Thing. the idea of building ephemeral structure is something I like because it's, I mean, whether I work with like existing buildings or structure I build, but which are there for just a limited amount of time, is like kind of, yeah, building your own like canvas and context. So, yeah. Just another old project. This one was in Cuba. Yeah, the importance of working with the context is also like a cultural like thing, I think. I mean, it's really important from my point of view, not acting like a tourist, for example, like pretending to like do like the locals. I think it doesn't work at all. But try to find the right balance every time between like inspiration you have when you come to a place you don't know, and like to discover like just tiny bits of culture you had no idea about like the week before. But at the same time, not to I don't know. I mean, this was in Cuba. I had no idea about like I mean how people live there, and so I just tried to get some inspiration, but at the same time bring more of what I knew how to do, and finally maybe use more like European references rather than like Cuban references, for example. So yeah, more recent works now. So this is the exception. This is a permanent installation I did in Poland, in Wrocław in 2012. This was commissioned by this Hala Studecia place, which is now, I mean, it's like a multi-purpose like venue, but it was built early 20th century, and like it has a pretty crazy like a story that I was able to study a bit because they built, I mean, it was a commission for the museum of this place actually. So we had access to a lot of archives, and we saw like all the different like steps like of this like from the construction to the moment when the place was used by the Nazis, for example, to like contemporary use for like sport games, for example. So. Like the very rich story of this building was also a pretty big inspiration for this piece. And actually, I mean, I directed this piece, and I mean, it's always very hard to choose like one element to focus your project onto, because I mean, when you come to a place and people like just tell you the story of this place, and you have also a very limited amount of time to create your piece, because I mean it's another part of the work, but the money is not unlimited, of course, and you have to be able to produce the animation, to calibrate all the projectors and all the technical equipment, while thinking about like the concept of the piece. And you don't have, I mean, it's not like a movie, or you can like work on it for like two years, for example. It's it's very limited. It's like the whole process usually it's like 6 months or maybe 8 months in the base case. So it's really hard to try to gather all your thoughts and like create a piece, and also trying to avoid just being how could I say that? I mean, not just making like visual effects, basically, because I think it's also something in video mapping that is happening now, or maybe it happened also in before, but it's not only about being like spectacular. Of course, it's easy to make things impressive because you're working at a very large scale, but I think this is not the most interesting purpose of like video mapping. It's more about like the dialogue between the like something very physical and something very like ephemeral, such as light, and what like both elements can like say to each other. So I will play just an extract of this. want to see the full-length video, it's available on Vimeo. So yeah, this piece was actually the first one I did with a very immersive place. So basically, there's not really. I mean, you can look anywhere you want, and it will still work basically. Of course, I mean, most people, I mean, in real life, tended to just sit on the ground or even lie on the ground and look at the ceiling at the central circle because I guess it naturally attracts your vision. So, but still, I think it's also very. I mean, an interesting notion. I think is also this. I mean, the idea of what's happening out of the frame, basically. And with this kind of installation, I'm trying to also work with what you don't see, what's behind you. So the visuals as the soundtrack were kind of specialized. So at some point, you could see something in front of you and behind you at the same. And I mean, you couldn't see it, obviously, but things were happening in front of you and behind you, and you have had to kind of choose what things to look at. So I like this idea also that the spectator can make his own choice, regarding to what he wants to look at. So basically, it's a bit like when you're in a museum, so you can choose to look at one painting and not the other, and skip another one, depending on your interest or just the mood you're in. So. Yeah, I also like the idea, and I try to kind of use it in my work. Back to a more frontal approach with this scenography, but I tried also to play with the context in a different way. I mean, here was for a live performance. I was kind of back to my VJ roots with a friend of mine. So we did a performance on this structure. We had a very limited budget, actually, for this project. So I built it with styrofoam plates that are used for insulation. So it's very cheap material. It's very light. So I built all the structure myself. And the thing is, we had this crazy venue, which used to be a former square, but now you have a glass roof on top. So the idea here was to try to have the maximum contrast between the structure and the existing building. So I wanted to have something very clean, very white, and very geometric. I mean, it's also a personal taste, but I think in this place it worked pretty nicely. So I mean, here the animation is kind of, I mean, it gets out of screen because you had also this layer of elements on the ground, but you're still in front of it. Yeah, just a quick video maybe. So yeah, you get the idea. I'm just going through the other projects because otherwise I won't have time to. But the video is available online if you want to see more of it. So yeah, this is just a quick mock-up for a new version of this project I want to make even more immersive, where the audience is actually able to go through the structure. So it's a bit bigger, and it will be in the shape of a wave. Okay, this is just a model. So yeah, besides this, I also started to experiment with physical structures that I add to the building, because the idea behind this is also to create your own canvas. Finally, I mean, this idea of using the context is something I'm interested in, but building my own kind of, I mean, it's not even screen, but yeah, canvas. I'm being able to project onto is also something that interests me, and to create a dialogue with the existing architecture, not only with the ephemeral light, but also with something that is like physical and like that you can really like feel also in terms of like physical presence. So yeah, I built this like wood. It's made of wood and metal structure. It was a project for an antique museum in France. So the structure was actually inspired by a small pagan idol that was in the museum, and that was found like nearby in the south of France. And the idea here was to hide this tiny face inside this like structure made of line. So the light, actually without light, you couldn't see what was hiding in this structure. So I like also the idea that the light is here to reveal existing things, not only to create new things, but to reveal what's hidden. So I think it's also one of the elements that are pretty exciting in video mapping, and that should be maybe investigated a bit more. So yeah, this is another still for this project. I won't play the video, but if you want to see it, it's online. So the ARC from 2013, this time it was a totally different projection support, which it was like a cactus basically. So when I had this proposal of like working this ethnobotanical garden, so it was in Mexico, in the city of Oaxaca. I mean, I was totally like amazed by the pictures they sent me. All the, I mean, I don't know if you see it well here. Maybe I should have put like a picture by day, but you had like this cactus grove in the middle of the garden with very vertical cactus with different sizes and all. And I totally fell in love with this place and started to develop like some kind of like visual identity for each of the cactus. I had the idea of kind of creating some kind of I mean, when I saw the cactus, the first thing I thought about was like some like vegetal beings, but all like against each other, you know, like that. Like they were afraid or escaping something. This is why I called it the Ark. It reminded me the myth of the Ark, like when all the animals gather on a boat. And I mean, I think it's also important to just find inspiration in very like subjective, you know, feelings you have when you see this place for the first time. Also, the first impression is something very important for me. I value it a lot. Usually I go on site the first time for like just the location scouting and the technical, the first technical scouting, and I also take, I mean, as many notes as I can about this first impression thing, about what it evokes me, and of course I also ask a lot of information about the place to the people who invite me. But yeah, I like this idea of being quite free to bring my own subjectivity in it. And the thing is, if another artist used the same place for also projecting like visuals onto the cactus, I guess he will probably have a very different interpretation of the place. So this was something I like. So here, yeah, I used the cactus as some kind of totems. The installation here was, it looks pretty like frontal here, but it was not. You had actually two parts, one with this cactus grove that was like surrounding you, and another one more frontal with a pond and like a kind of cactus wall. And I built this like structure that you can see, like which is underwater, to add another layer. And actually, the people, the audience, was supposed to see the piece twice. One from the perspective. I mean, one in the first part with this immersive cactus grove, and then they had to go around like the cactus grove and to see the piece on the other side. And so we worked also a 12-channel audio, so people could hear things that they didn't see actually. So it was this kind of game between sound and visuals as well. I'm gonna play some extract of it. Here it goes. You can't really see anything here.
sun. Vanished legions, destroyed for the silver queen of the ghost world.
Okay, sorry I'm interrupting the video, but you can see the full version online. Thanks. So yeah, basically, I mean, just a short story, but like playing with like different type of like canvases, like plants, for example, is an amazing challenge because, for example, I mean, there are a lot of things you cannot really know before going on site and before even like setting up your projector and start working on site. At this point, of course, the whole piece is like almost done, but then you realize, for example, that the cactus bend with the wind. So, and I mean, as the visuals were supposed to be like really like aligned with the cactus, I had a very big problem, like at this point, like when everything was already done. So because the picture would like go off the cactus when it bends. So I had to rethink like the way I wanted to work with the cactus. And then because at first I used a lot of fills, like the whole cactus was white, for example. And finally I decided to use like only small elements on black, because black is basically transparent when you project it onto like a dark canvas, such as a cactus. So finally, the patterns and the small elements would go off sometime, but it wasn't like such a big deal as there was no real like outline, you know, of the cactus. So I really like also how the projection support challenges me to find like creative solutions and also I mean you can't really do otherwise. You have to reconsider the support. It's not like a blank page where you can like do anything you want. Of course, it's I mean you can still do a lot of things, but what I thought was like, it's really funny because at first when I started to do mapping, I thought it was a solution to get more freedom somehow, and then I started to realize there were probably more constraints than working with a traditional screen. So, but I like this idea of being like challenged by the projection support. So yeah, here are a few stills and the video you just saw. Yeah, I will go quickly through this one. It's called Défilé. It's back to a very frontal approach, but it's more related to the example of Bertrand Lavier I showed you before, like this, the inspiration from this artist. Here, basically the idea was to build a physical web browser because I'm really interested in this, very like immaterial like element, which is the web browser. It's something you only have on your computer. It doesn't have like a physical existence, really. Same goes for most like computer graphics, but I like to choose this element and to build it for real. So I had like this pretty massive web browser. It was a Google Chrome, but an old version. I don't know if you can spot the difference, but so I built it. I built it. Some people built it actually, and it was hanged onto the like over this building here. So, and basically the idea, it was not like a real like online session, but it was like a piece much inspired by like internet graphics, and the idea of also of the window, which is some kind of screen, and trying to question this format of the page, basically the page, the screen, like the window, or even the field, because I learned during this piece that the field was some kind of first division of the space, which inspired later the format of the page, and etc. So also the idea is, this is a direct reference to Bertrand Lavier. Actually, I used you just see it for 1 second, but I chose this still for that. It's one of the sculpture from like the Disney series. So it's really funny because this is personally one of my favorite pieces, and this is a piece that nobody liked, basically, because the thing is, when this festival invited me, they expected me to do a mapping on this building, on this opera building. It's the opera house, and actually I wasn't really interested in doing like a classic mapping on this facade, because first, the architecture is not really inspiring. And second, it's just, I don't want to sound like pretentious or what, but like doing like another mapping on a building that is not really interesting, it's not really exciting at all. So this is why I really tried to do something new, and they didn't really get it, I think. But the funny thing is that there was also a big difference, because I actually, after the piece, I had the chance to talk about it like publicly, and trying to explain that finally it was very, to me, strongly connected with this idea of video mapping, of extracting elements from the computer world, from the which are basically pixels and just electric signals, and trying to bring them into the physical world, which is exactly the process also of Bertrand Lavier in his work, and something that interests me as a visual artist working with the technique of video mapping. So it was maybe more on a conceptual level than on a visual. It wasn't very impressive as a result, but I think it made sense to me to use all these internet elements to talk about this topic. I'll go quickly through this one because it's it sounds fancy with the Jay-Z name, but it's like a commercial project I did in New York for a collaboration between Jay-Z and BARNEYS New York. That was just doing a collection of goods, and they wanted some kind of immersive environment. It was pretty interesting to do because we work with film, and we had to develop a custom rig for with 6 Canon C300 to be able to shoot 360 degrees. So we shot in various locations in New York, where Jay-Z grew up and stuff. So it was pretty cool. The result is not amazing, but the process was pretty cool. It was a commercial work. Don't get me wrong, you can still do some cool things with commercial works, but usually you have like an artistic director who says usually no, basically, and yeah, it ends up being like a bit. Anyway. So, like, totally the opposite. It was an experimental project I did in Brussels back in 2013. Was like some kind of was a mix between a club night and an exhibition. And this time, it's a very tiny project, but I wanted to have like this like projection going also on the audience. So it was a mix of like video mapped like objects. But all the projectors were set like in very low position, so like people like would be like caught in the light, and yeah, I like this idea to also kind of yeah, just play with that, and also not always being in the perfect like mapping thing, you know, where like you don't have any pixel like off and stuff. So another project from last year, actually, so it's called Magnetron. It's also like an immersive installation with like different techniques, like projection, LED lights, and a Ferris wheel, which is pretty crazy. Actually, it's the same people who invited me for the cactus piece. They were running the festival in another location, and they had this like space with basically it was an empty space. They just had this big Ferris wheel that was newly built, and actually the city wanted to attract more people in this area of the city, and basically the thing is there was nothing there but this Ferris wheel that was brand new and a huge square that was empty and maybe like 2 restaurants. So it was very weird place, and we had to, this was kind of a blank page with a Ferris wheel. And so, yeah, I came up with the idea of building this kind of light field people could like go through. And we had like different screens and structure that were like custom built, like the one you can see on both sides. And the funny thing is that, I mean, trying to use like the existing elements, that this big Ferris wheel, of course, was, I mean, it was impossible to project onto it. And at first, we asked to have like control over the LED system of the wheel, and they accepted. But the thing is, like 2 months before the show, finally, for some like warranty reason or like security breach, we weren't allowed to connect our computer directly to the LED system. So I mean, we're really in a pretty bad mood and position at that time. And finally, what we did is to, the only authorization we had was to operate manually the light switches, because it's basically like a panel with switches. And so we built a tiny robot, actually. So it was really, but because it started as a joke, basically, like, oh yeah, we should just build a tiny robot or hire a poor guy, or do it ourselves also, and not being paid for that. But and finally, we chose the robot solution that was the ethical solution, and also it was quite cheap. And so finally, yeah, I mean, of course, when I say robot, it sounds like a super fancy technological thing, but it was built with a small Arduino. We put actually everything on site. I mean, in Puebla. It was in Puebla, in Mexico, and you can see it on the picture on the right. So it's basically an Arduino connected to 3 servo motors, which are connected to the light switches, because it was like rotating light switches, with a very cheap fabrication of this wooden frame here that we stuck onto this panel with GoPro suction cups. So, and finally, I mean, I couldn't believe it worked actually, but for 3 nights in a row, the system worked perfectly, and all the lights from the wheel were switched on and off, like in sync with the video and the sound elements. So of course we developed the software for the whole piece to synchronize all the LEDs and the video and stuff. But yeah, the result was I was pretty happy with the result. It was I mean, it's not always a matter of. I mean, I really don't think that the bigger the better. I mean, it's hard to say that while presenting this piece, but I mean. Like the cactus piece, for example, is much more human scale. I think video mapping could also be used for more like intimate context, and I think it has a lot of potential for that too. But yeah, back to the big toy. Yeah, it's some behind-the-scene pictures. So of course, you can imagine that I'm not the only one working on this project. So we had a pretty big team for that. It was for a digital art festival. For some reason, they had like lots of money. Because it's pretty funny. I don't know if it's always the case in Mexico, but for the installation with Cactus, like the governor of the state, of the Oaxaca state, saw the installation, and like his friend, who was also another governor from another state, wanted the same thing but bigger and better the next year. So I think this is how they got the money, because they were like pretty good at like selling projects. Anyway, that's just a detail of the story.
I really hate to interrupt. It's incredibly interesting, but we're a little bit under time pressure because the gala is a bit later, and I'd like to give the opportunity to the audience to ask some questions.
Sure.
Really incredible presentation. Thank you very, very much. And I'd like to take maybe just a couple of minutes. If there are any questions from the audience, just raise your hand.
Cool. I will play the video just while answering the questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks for your talk. It was interesting. I was just wondering if you could briefly mention your. I'm over here. Hi. If
Here?
you're looking for me.
Where? Sorry.
Straight ahead.
Okay.
Hello. If you could just talk about your preference with using white light, and if you ever any issues with sort of broadening your color palette.
Actually, the use of white is. I think it comes from a technical reason, basically, because working with projected light, especially when you're working with video projectors, the white is the only color, I would say, that is bright enough to react to even dark materials like concrete, for example. Actually, in some pieces, I use some touches of color, but it's really hard to get a good color palette when you're working on very uneven and different projection canvas like Cactus or like a concrete dome, for example. So when I can do it, I try at least to see how it reacts to a color palette. But usually, unfortunately, I always go back to a more black and white. It's also, I must say, it's also like personal taste because it's. I like to focus also on simple graphics. But it's too bad I don't have time to show it. But my last piece is much more colorful. But you won't be able to see it.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question, and then we're going to have to move on.
This one.
So make it good.
I'm interested in the workflow you have. Do you take first a picture, and then which software do you use to achieve these accurate projections?
So the workflow was very different in the beginning and now, because now we have a lot of different softwares to achieve this video mapping thing. But the first project, believe it or not, were done all in Illustrator and After Effects. I used to put Illustrator in full screen on the building and draw the building point by point, line by line, in full screen on the projector. So it gave me a canvas, a projection canvas that was exactly the point of view of the projector, actually. But now we had, I work a lot with architect plans, and then I work the picture. But it really depends on which surface you use. Sometimes I use 3D models. For the dome, for example, I had to use a 3D model because it's very complex to surface to project onto. But when it's more like frontal projection, usually working with architect plan is fine. And then I'm using media servers, depending on the project. It could be Watch Out or Catalyst or some other, which usually have warping functions. And for smaller projects, I use Milumin or even MadMapper, which are pretty great softwares developed by very tiny companies. So yeah, I mean, now there is a lot of like options we didn't have like 5 or 8 years ago. So yeah. Oh, the animation. The animation is mostly done with After Effects and Cinema 4D. So yeah, it's very classic workflow in the end.
Okay, I'm really sorry we don't have time for more questions right now. Hopefully, we'll all have the opportunity to speak to Romain maybe during the festival to ask more questions.
Yeah, sure. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you.
Thanks so much for the excellent presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.